Yes, I think in many countries which have had ethnic conflict, when things get too difficult, sometimes either on their own initiative or those of the international community, they engage in a dialogue as to why the issues, the conflict had arisen, and what might be the way to resolve that. And often, because these issues are so fundamental, each party wants the settlement recorded in the Constitution, and it's where it's entrenched and can't easily be changed by either party. And also the whole process of sitting down and talking with the help of mediators, people with no specific interest other than to make peace. It's a good forum in which to thrash out differences. And a number of countries have experienced that, from Northern Ireland, my own country, Kenya, the breakup of the Federation of Yugoslavia. There are many, many countries which have actually resorted to South Sudan, which led to South Sudan secession. But I should also say that though this is not a bad way in which to resolve differences and then entrench the settlement, there are also examples where negotiations of this kind have not led to peace, and the most one that comes to mind immediately is Sri Lanka, because it's still embroiled in conflict. Dalai Lama and the Chinese couldn't settle, and so on. So, but on whole, the experience is that it's good to sit down and talk, and perhaps with neutral mediators, and then I think differences can be resolved. Well, yes, it does, and I think it should, because each country's context is different. In relation to pluralism or multi-ethnicity, there are, I would say, different approaches. Sometimes you get an approach where the dominant group structures state and the Constitution in a way to register their dominance. They are the majority, and others have to fit in somehow. And that has, of course, led to conflict. We talked just now. And so another approach is to make a constitution which reflects the presence of one or two or three or four or more numerous communities, which is sometimes a federal solution, sometimes other forms of power sharing. So no group is really left out of the structures of the state. And I guess Canada would be an example of that. India is an example of that. Other countries have asymmetrical, just one part of the country is somewhat different and they get some autonomy. Others have an arrangement either separately or linked to that, which is you share power at the national level. And so every community is represented in the cabinet in some way. And the third one is maybe what we might call in the term pluralism, whereby you treat every individual as an individual, not as a member of a community, as an individual equally. So while people can have their own religion, their own languages, traditions, which they maintain in their private life, private sphere, but when they meet in the public sphere, they meet as individuals of equal rights. So you are, in your case, I would say you're a Canadian when it comes to public affairs, but you can be Francophone, you can be somebody who came from Hungary, or someone who came from East Africa, thanks to Idi Amin, so that people are able to protect their cultures and flourish but they also become, in a way, part of the culture of the wider community, which is His Highness's own vision of multi-ethnic societies. So now you get constitutions reflecting all three approaches. So they are very much shaped by the composition of the population and diversity. Well, I think that there are several limitations. You could have a mix of population which under which communities don't necessarily have broadly the same number, or the communities are not situated or settled in compact areas where they could say, all right, in this area, even in a totally democratic system, we will be in majority. So they can accept a national government, even which they may not have much influence over, but they have their back. It depends also on the attitude of the communities. Some are very belligerent, as in Sri Lanka the last 30, 40 years. Others are more accommodating. And then you generally have somebody in the majority community who wants their dominance to be acknowledged in the Constitution. Others are there as guests, as people like Fiji did to the Indo-Fijians there. Or you can have in the minority group people who say nothing less than secession will do. So negotiations in those contexts become very difficult. And even if you get a settlement, there is no guarantee that the settlement will work in the long run, because these forces are still there. And you saw a lot of this happening with the breakup of the former Yugoslavia. So it's not easy to negotiate that. And therefore one needs a strong commitment to human rights, to social justice, for such delicate compromises to be made and to be sustained. There are two phases in the making of the Kenyan Constitution. The first phase started with the challenge to the authoritarian rule of President Moi, which was based on the dominance of his own ethnic group, the Kalenjin. But more than that, it was an inherently very authoritarian system. People's rights had been eroded. Nobody could challenge the regime. Many groups got excluded. So with the change in the whole world, with the end of the Cold War, and greater attention being paid to human rights by the West, Kenyans took that opportunity to mount resistance to the rule, very much the same time as in Philippines, people were throwing out Marcos. So that was a movement of political reform, human rights, and it wasn't so much geared towards ethnicity, but it was based on the notion that every community in Kenya is part of is a citizen, has equal rights, and the government must reflect the diversity. Now that process lasted for a number of years. The government in the end came under pressure from America and UK to respond to these concerns of the people. Otherwise, Moi would go the way of Marcos, and he took this advice. And so a formal process started of constitution making. And that lasted for about 4 years, and I had some role in that. And when a new constitution was prepared, we had a change of government, and President Kibaki took over, and he likewise had no interest in reform. He wanted to go back to the bad days of Moi. So he made sure this constitution was not adopted. And this produced a lot of resentment in the public. And then in 2007, we had general elections where Kibaki clearly rigged the elections. And this led to a lot of violence. About 1,500 people were killed in the course of 2-3 days in the most brutal way imaginable. And 500,000 people were thrown away from where they lived because they had moved to another area, not their indigenous one. And this horrible, horrible period in our history led to intervention by, we were talking earlier about outside intervention, by a group of eminent Africans led by Kofi Annan, had just finished his term as Secretary General. So under pressure internationally and from local groups, it was agreed that the constitution which Kibaki had rejected should be revived. That was very much Kofi Annan's line. And so part of the settlement they made, in a very short term, was a system of power sharing. The two candidates then both went into the cabinet. And meanwhile, to start reviewing this constitution and enacting it. So I think to understand the significance of the constitution, one shouldn't just focus on the election period, which led to this violence, because we have a history of violence for a very long time. And the earlier movement, I think, was more important in one sense than this period of violence. And the constitution that was adopted is probably 80% of what Kibaki had rejected. So I think you need to look at this whole history. And fundamentally, I think Kenyans realized that they had to rethink their polity. We couldn't go on the basis of conflict on ethnic ground. Religion wasn't such an important factor, but it was a factor, race, tribalism, that we had to envision a new Kenya, a new identity as Kenyans, without abandoning our other affiliations. So that was significance, and it got adopted, as these things often do, unfortunately, when there's a major crisis or catastrophe. Constitutions in these countries of mixed population do sometimes require some terrible jolt like that before enough pressures build up to settle it. And that is what happened to us. I think 2 or 3 things that were not in the original draft constitution, but which were introduced in 2008 in the negotiations between political parties and the eminent Africans. 2 that I find unfortunate is one is what sometimes people call imperial presidency. Like many Commonwealth countries, we started our independence with a parliamentary system, which is more accommodating of different groups and parties than the one-person rule of a presidency. Unfortunately, most politicians negotiating with Kofi Annan had ambitions of being the big ruler. So they sort of wanted a presidential system. And that, I think, was unfortunate, because when we have elections, as we had one last year, the whole thing becomes ethnicized again. And people say, we want our men there. And it's never our women, it's always our men. We want our men there. So though they had worked together for 2.5 years after this violence as a power-sharing government, all that was abandoned. And because there's such a prize, there's only one prize, the whole thing gets ethnicized. Whereas parliamentary system, more required. The second, which is related in a way to structure of state, is that we, when I say we, mean the earlier phase, had recommended a system of elections which is different from the yours or ours, which is first past the post system. That works very well in communities which are very cohesive, have common history, common philosophy. And it doesn't matter if one group loses because they may come back next time. Anyway, the fundamental values are all shared. In multi-ethnic societies, there are sharp divisions. And the system we recommended was proportional representation, whereby you will get seats and according to your population size, if you all vote ethnically. Hopefully you won't, but if you do, it's very inclusive process. And that is what was adopted in 2004 in the first phase. But this was changed to the one we had, which has been part of the cause of conflict. So this, if you are fighting an election in proportional representation system, you have an interest in appealing to every community. If you first past the post, you can say, oh, my people, they are 60% of this area. I don't have to worry. I'll just talk to them. And so, a large number of the people in the constituency are left out. Whereas in proportional representation, you get every single vote counts. So you need to broaden your appeal to all the people in your larger constituency. So that was also thrown out by politicians who only knew one system. And so unfortunately, these two things run counter to the notion of pluralism, of working together, of having multi-ethnic parties. Our parties tend to be effectively mono-ethnic. So I think these are two weaknesses in the Constitution. Well, I think I sometimes say that in Kenya we adopted a revolutionary constitution. If you look at the details of it, it is partly responding to our diversity in a constructive, positive way, but it's also restructuring the state, because we had a colonial state which was never dismantled and continued to rely on coercive power. Every president has relied on brutal police, brutal army to stay in power, and we wanted to move away from that and make it a democratic society, consensus society, and and we also put a lot of emphasis on integrity in public life, because we were not only highly ethnicized, we had become highly corrupt. So we wanted integrity in public life, high standards of good behavior, good record, to be a candidate for parliament, to have senior positions in government. We had built-in transparency and a high degree of accountability. And so it ran against the existing political practices, and so in a way we had a revolutionary constitution, but we did not have a revolution. All the old guard stayed on, and in the last election, which was the first one held under the new constitution last year, 2013, all the old guard came back in parliament, and public service, of course, had never been cleaned. A lot of corruption, of course, jointly. If you have a corrupt minister, you have corrupt, they have to work through the public service. And so these people who are still in power have absolutely no interest in the new constitution. That, I mean, the dramatic way to illustrate that is that our president is an indictee of the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. And so is his deputy president, both from the violence of 2007-8. They fought on different sides. They came from different tribes. They were both indicted for the most horrible crimes imaginable. Well, such a person is a president, and his assistant is, they were the bitter enemies. They probably paid money to their fellow tribesmen to kill the other tribesmen. And so there is no accountability. We continue with impunity for this most terrible violence, which has been a part of our history. It wasn't something new. It got a lot of attention publicly, but every election we have had has been attended by violence. So their interest in people want to be politicians because they want to make money. Civil servants look at every opportunity to make money. And so this is a small class. They come from different tribes, but there is underlying solidarity, class solidarity, and a class which is committed to the oppression of the people, to plunder of the state. So how are they going to work with this constitution, which is a model of accountability, integrity, inclusion? Social justice is a big theme because 60% of the people live below the poverty line. So that is a problem of implementation. And we spend a lot of time thinking in 2003-04, when the constitution was being finalized, how can we ensure its implementation? Because everything had to change from before. And so we had put in some mechanism. It has proved too weak against the existing ruling class who wants to maintain the old constitutional practices. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that Kenya constitution had dismantled imperial presidency. If by imperial presidency we mean a system of government in which power is, executive power at least, is concentrated in the hands of one person. And his powers are very extensive under the Constitution, but they are made subject to various forms of accountability. So far, our experience of the Constitution shows that they have cheerfully embraced all the powers but ignored the accountability. So what I think Constitution has done, and which is important, is that it has moved away from a very highly centralized state towards semi-federalism, so that power has now been shared with government in 47 what we call counties, and people have a lot of expectations of the good things that they think this decentralization or semi-federalism will do. It will reduce the power of the center, but not as much as they think, because the powers given to the counties are not that high. But nevertheless, there will be a whole new arena of we hope, democratic politics with easier accountability because the area covered is not that huge. People can watch their government on a day-to-day basis. We hope that it will bring in new practices of accountability, of people's participation. So that, I think, is what people are looking forward to. And in the short time that system has been brought into force, the results are very mixed. Well, I think we have basically to get rid of our deeply rooted tribalism. People don't like that word, Africans don't like that word, but it is that, what it is. Or parochial ethnicity, which is not so much reflected in the way people live, in professions and where they live, social life. In politics, ethnicity becomes important for the reasons I have tried to explain. So if you could get rid of that, I think we will have made a big gain, and that will lay the basis for true pluralism, because we won't say, oh wow, he's a Kikuyu, he's a Kalenjin. You will say, well, he's a fellow Kenyan, and we are the world's best runners, marathon, and you should be in Kenya when the Olympics are on. People are not literally hugging each other, but you walk in the streets, and last night this chap won the marathon, and everybody is walking with great pride, and we look and we smile at each other. That kind of thing is what we want. So I think that would be very important. The second big thing would be if you could eradicate corruption. It is like a cancer. It has eaten into a body politic, created so much suffering for people, and even starvation now. It has led to such accumulation of wealth through the plunder of the state resources. If we could get rid of these two things, I think our constitution will immediately grow, flourish, and these are two major problems that we face.